Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Kubernetes by Example Insider, where we try to interview people who are actually kind of doing the work in the community so that we can get a sense of what they're trying to accomplish. And by extension, if we talk to the actual people who are doing the work, hopefully we'll get a better sense of what's going to happen next rather than relying on press releases and things like that. So today we would like to invite Idit Levine, who is the excuse me, the CEO and founder of Solo. And if you would like to, well, let me introduce Josh Wood real quick and say, hey, thanks for coming. As I often say with Red Hat people, titles and groups and all that change so often that I like you to introduce yourself. So Josh, if you'd want to introduce yourself, and then we'll talk to Idit.
Right on. Yeah. So, hello, Landon and Idit. I'm Josh Wood. I'm a principal developer advocate for Openshift at Red Hat. And while it is true that many of our titles change rapidly, mine never has in the whole time I've been here.
All right.
So that's either a mark of stability or a certain stagnation in my career path. Either way, I'm happy.
One of the two.
And I'm one of the guys who makes those press releases and things like that. So Idit can give us the real story instead of my stylized vision of the future.
Exactly. So Idit, you want to tell us a little bit about your background and why you're here?
Yeah, sure. So, I'm, as you mentioned, I'm the founder and CEO of Solo. And Solo is a company that honestly it's not that different than Red Hat. We're making open source project simpler to consume, right? And then actually that's what Openshift and Red Hat is doing as well. But we are focusing more about networking. So the project that we are involved in is project like Istio, which is a service mesh, or project like Cilium, which is kind of like a CNI. So that's the work that we are more doing. And again, the idea is just to make it way more accessible for people, make sure that they will be able to consume it, work more about the user experience, and how to basically be able to really fit it to each organization. Organization structure and people, and honestly just make it easier to consume. So that's not that different than what you guys doing, I guess.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and that's in my opinion, right? I mean, that's really what a vendor brings to the table a lot of the time, right? Is that,
Yes.
is how can I make it a little bit easier to consume for, the typical enterprise, or, sometimes, another big thing that Red has always offered is, indemnification,
Yes.
which can be harrowing for a lot of corporations. So it's really kind of important. We do like to start though with like a little bit of background in the sense of what got you into a kind of open source to begin with.
Yeah, so in open source, I think that I'm doing it for a long time. I think that honestly, when I started, I started actually on the area of, honestly, a long time ago, Cloud Foundry and Mesos. That was exactly on the, Docker just came. And I think that, I was in the first Docker Con. So I think that's where kind of like it's made me excited about open source. So I was in Docker Con. I was doing a lot of work with Docker. Know Solomon Hayek very, very well. And then basically when the war, let's say, started between Kubernetes and Cloud Foundry and Mesos, I was actually really, really active in all those community. And then, so that's basically what we did. We did a lot of stuff that related to unikernel and other kind of like trying to push the boundaries. I basically started since then. And honestly, I love it because I'm usually a person that always looking at what next, right? And the good thing about that market is that it's not you sitting in a closed room and kind of like working by yourself and moving incrementally, is that we're working on it together everywhere, right? And so I love it. As you say, I'm kind of like the person who say, what next? So
yeah.
So now
I know
it's part of Solo. It's giving it the ability to decide or to create the what next, which is really, really exciting.
Nice. So kind of, asking a question of somebody who is involved in kind of all the communities, what feature or whatever of Cloud Foundry do you think you're most kind of missing from Kubernetes? Or do you think it's like on its way there? Or, is there anything that you really kind of miss? Because I say that all the time about Subversion is like, I really wish it did like kind of the submodule thing in Git is like, but in Subversion, it did a much nicer job. And I'm just, it's like, I miss that. It doesn't mean I want to go back to Subversion by any stretch of imagination, but I do miss that like one piece.
Yeah, I think that what Cloud Foundry did really, really well is the user experience. I mean, I think this is still something that is missing a little bit from Kubernetes. Not sure why, honestly. I know that that Knative was a intent to create something like that, but it's still it's not yeah, it's not as great as Cloud Foundry was. But honestly, that's the only thing that I think I will take from there. I think all the back end of it, like once it's actually getting to the Cloud Foundry, um, I think that's, that was way, way overcomplicated in my opinion. I just
Yeah, yeah.
install it was a huge problem. And I think that also, in my opinion, generally, as someone working in the open source quite a lot, I think that one of the problem that was there is that the way the community was operated was a little bit different than Kubernetes or any other open source that I know. In order to commit something, you have to do these things called dojo, right?
Mhm.
Which is honestly, it's a huge barrier in order to be part of a community, and they're not just going to get your pull request unless you were in this dojo. So I think that
Yeah.
honestly that's a little bit, like, I think that what's beautiful in the Kubernetes ecosystem or any other, honestly, is the fact that the exceptions expect it. Like, people, whoever want to help, like, please do, right? We want you to join.
Right.
And I think that in Cloud Foundry it was a little bit different. It was more like, we will choose who is these people, and we will have to do it our way, which I think honestly created a little bit of issue.
That's
So
such a
that
hard
is
balance there. Yeah,
it
like
is, and
getting that right.
it's a really interesting balance to me, and I'm interested, Idit, if you think that that difference in sort of the governance and style of the communities around these projects might have something to do with that difference in user experience that is the end result of their outputs, right? Like, in Kubernetes, there's a whole lot of openness, and a whole lot of folks can be chefs in a very large kitchen, and that has a lot of great outcomes. But like, if you can't tell, I'm sort of hinting at an opinion I have here, but I wonder if you agree. It's like, in a way, that more closed nature of the Cloud Foundry ecosystem maybe led the end result for the user to be a little more focused, a little easier to digest.
Yeah.
Like, do you kind of see that effect?
Of course, because I can tell you that I wanted to contribute, and it was very hard for me because I never passed the dojo, right? And I never went, just because that wasn't my job, right? I wasn't sending my EMC to do the dojo, so that's very, very limited because I can code, and it's a shame that I couldn't influence. So I think that that's a huge barrier. I think that also, if you think about it, let's be honest, right? I mean, a lot of the contribution to going to an open source usually is people that's their focus at work, right? I mean, Red Hat is paying the money, but those guys are dedicated to Kubernetes, and they're doing whatever they need there. I think that that's extremely different. So first of all, that's where the most of the contribution. But as I said to you, like, I mean, as company like Solo, we also doing this, right? We're basically contributing wherever we can. So the question is, if you're thinking about the experience of Cloud Foundry, if I was Solo right now, would I actually send, my people right now to a week or 2 weeks? I think it was way more than a week, right? I wish it was a week, or something like a month, or something kind of like training somewhere in a location of a dozen. So it have to be in San Francisco. It have to be with everybody. It have to be per role. I mean, I'm just not sure that this is something that I would, as a startup, do, honestly. So it's really limited to you. Who is those company that can focus on this? And that will be the big organization that honestly can do that. So, yeah, you're losing a lot of good ideas. Honestly, a lot of good engineers that working in companies like, like Solo, right? More like, quick and, and innovative. So I think that you're losing a little bit here. Yeah, definitely.
So I know Solo is kind of more generally focused on kind of networking at large, right? But as I recall, right, you started kind of in the service mesh space, and I'm kind of curious, what is it about like kind of the service mesh idea was attractive to you that kind of said, hey, I should go and make this better?
Yeah, so I mean, honestly, to me, when I started the company and I look at the market, right, because it's very depends on the time, right? If I would probably do the company, I don't know, 5 years ago, probably I will do also orchestration or something like that. So when I got in mind and started the company, basically I tried to figure out what will be the next problem that people will have, right? I mean, okay, so we already know is the people using Docker, right, or container in general. We already know that now everything moving from monolithic to microservices. In that point, I even bet it wasn't that clear in the market yet that Kubernetes will be these things that will win it all. So now the question is, what will be the people problem? And to me, it was very simple. If you're taking something that is, but one binary, one big binary, and cut it to pieces, somehow you need to reassemble them, right? I mean, eventually it should look like one application. So I understood that the problem that people will have is around, first of all, connecting, right, those services. Second of all, make sure that when you're doing it in a secure way, that no one can come in the middle, because now everything is over the wire. And the last one is observability, right? Honestly, there's so many replication, and when the requests coming, it's seriously like a murder mystery to figure out what's going wrong. So when I looked at all of this, I said, okay, that's obviously the problem that people will need to solve. When I looked around, there was the concept already of service mesh. It came from the Buoyant guy, Linkerd basically, but it wasn't well implemented. I will be honest. It was the first Buoyant, the first implementation of Linkerd. Honestly, like in service mesh, there is this concept of sidecar, which hopefully will go away soon, but it is. And I think that in Buoyant or first Linkerd, we call it side bus because it was so huge, it's Java. So I looked at this and I said, well, that's not great. That's solving the right problem, right? It's focusing on the right feature. They did a good product market, product design. But actually the implementation wasn't great. So that was the first option. And the second option, Istio just was announced, basically. Mm-hmm. And when I looked at this again, there was a lot of stuff that I liked. It made a lot more sense. But there was also some decision that I was kind of like questioning. For instance, this mixer thing that every time that the request is coming, you need to do kind of like a round trip for a gRPC server. That doesn't make any sense to me on the request path. I think that request path latency is extremely important. So I kind of accepted and said, well, that's interesting. That's something that probably is going to the better solution. But it will take a long time until we get there. So this is why we basically started first on the gateway, then moved to the mesh, then extending to CNI, basically
right.
Working. But the vision didn't change, which is, we need to do, it's basically the hashtag or whatever is application networking, right? I mean, everything your application need in order to basically work in terms of networking.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you raise a really good point, right? Which is that, what a lot of people don't realize is that as soon as you start getting into any kind of service-oriented architecture, whether we call it, SOA or we call it microservices or, even, there's lots of other ones, Corba, right? The challenge starts to become is like, okay, now I got all the little pieces. Now, how do I put them back together again? And so I think for the audience, right, it's kind of like, service mesh is a big part of that glue and how you bring it together. And I think, the other point I really want to highlight too is that observability factor. I worked on a system that actually used COM over HTTP many years ago, and we actually built our own observability as well, because
that's what we
tracing across the services, it's impossible unless you use those kinds of tools. And so I think that observability is a huge.
And we have right now, Solo is growing like crazy right now, so we're getting a lot of people joining us from organizations like Spotify or a lot of others, right? AWS and others. And they're all basically coming in, on the first kind of like meeting on the onboarding, they're telling us the same thing. The reason they join is because they tried to build it on the other companies. And if they had service mesh, it would make their life way, way simpler. So honestly, it's kind of like a very good validation for our side.
Right.
So, okay, we're doing something right.
Yeah, totally. No, I strongly agree. I mean, before I left Red Hat, my primary focus was on service mesh stuff, because I'm also a big believer in services. But the trade-off to all those nice little services is keeping track of them is very, very difficult. And if you go back to the SOAP SOA days, right? I mean, they tried to do the same thing, except it was all very top down.
Right.
And with the microservice, it's all very bottom ups, but and so it gives you you can do it piecemeal, but you still are trying to solve the same problem at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So Josh, did you want to add to that, or should we move to the next thing?
Well, I think that issue of sort of the technology at the service mesh is an answer to this proliferation of services and a way of addressing that problem, sort of leads me into, so I have this basic understanding of that concept, both behind service meshes generally, what you're doing at solo.io. How how do you connect that to that first bit we were talking about, like user experience and developer experience? Like what are the real improvements in developer experience of a service mesh? Because if I could phrase it in a joke, is as a developer, a guy who talks to developers a lot, the way you could improve service mesh UX for
Just
me
take it
would be
away.
to make it disappear,
I
right?
know. I
So
know.
I want to hear about how does that happen?
Yeah. No, so exactly what you described. I mean, I think that the reason there is service mesh is, as you said, is basically to say, you know, you, Mr. Developer, focus on the business development and business logic, and you let us, the IT or the SRE or the organization, to basically come with all those policy and make sure that it's secure, that it's observed, that it's everything that you need. I think that, so that was the purpose of service mesh, right? Back on the day, I said that it's like virtualize that from the user, right? I mean, all the idea is to take it away. I think that a few things. So first of all, if you're looking at the way the API of those projects are happening, I don't think that that's coming, you know, the persona idea of who is actually using it, who should know about that. It's something that is really messed, right? It's basically most of the time your organization people still need to know about the mesh, maybe will configure it, who is in charge of whom is kind of like very arbitrary. I think that one of the things, for instance, that we built to our product is basically understanding that the people that is doing the application are not the people who's basically configuring it sometime. And in each organization, by the way, is different. There is a lot of customer of us that actually are more, you know, the users are very advanced and they're actually interested in kind of like do it all. But there is, or we have startup that honestly you don't have choice in that way. We don't care. You're writing the code, you're running it, you're doing whatever, right? And there's people that it's totally abstract. They don't even know that there is cluster behind this thing. So I think that it's very different. The question is, who is this organization? The way we build a product is there is the concept of workspace that I do know that this concept is actually coming right now to the Kubernetes ecosystem, which is great, which is basically the ability of, look, again, why are we doing all of this? Why there is Openshift and why there is Kubernetes and why there is VM, why there is all of this all together. Eventually, we're trying to do one thing. And these things is basically carve a piece of your infrastructure and delegate it to the application team. That's all you want to do, right? Mm-hmm. And what you also need to do is tell what they can and cannot do in that infrastructure. And if this is a very, very advanced team, so maybe you will give them, you know, yeah, you can do everything like observability and security and whatever, right? Go for it and do it. But there will be teams that I will not trust too much. And maybe all I want to do is tell them, you know, you're only in charge of the retries and a timeout. That's all. That's all I want you to do. So we build it to a product. It basically has the concept of workspace. You're basically choosing, clusters. So it's multi-cluster. So which cluster you want and which namespace you want on this cluster, we're grouping it together. And basically we're making sure that all of this is going to work, going to be secure and so on. So that's pretty strong. And that way, honestly, it's fitting to every organization because you can decide it, who can do what and in what level. You can decide it if they're pushing the configuration to the local clusters, which usually I don't think you should because you need to do a GitHub, or you can actually do it to the management cluster. But basically, all of this is built very nicely with the user experience that way that you will know, the developer will know what they need to know, right? You can come with your own CRD. The CRD is way more simpler, way more, friendly. So it's kind of like another layer that we build on top of the service mesh, which is make it more accessible, but also, taking configuration, multi-tenancy and multi-clusters, which I think Istio today is not honestly very great at this.
So
it's the first time I've heard CRD and friendly in the same sentence, I will say.
I mean, it's not that bad.
I'm quite sure that I call them friendly in the operator's book as often as I got. So you're but anyway, before I don't want to take us too far off into like the little details of this, but I am interested in something. So right now, you mentioned the workspaces effort in Kubernetes as sort of an augmentation of the namespace, which is like this classical term in the industry for defining a virtualized space of, dedicated to a user or a process or a view of a file system on Plan 9. What is the difference between the namespace and the workspace? Or a better question, really more specific for you, Idit, is what does a workspace mean in your product? Yes. Like you just mentioned the disconnect of sort of like Istio maybe not designed for this kind of environment. We're building on top of that. What does the workspace mean for a developer using it? It is configurability of my view of the world and how much I need to know about, and what else is like sort of virtualized into that workspace.
Yeah, so I mean, basically, as an admin, you basically see everything, right? Then you can basically create a workspace. And workspace basically, as I said, is a grouping of namespace in different cluster potentially, right? It doesn't have to be on the same cluster. Now, once you're grouping it, you need to tell me, first of all, who is the user that can use it, who are you delegating it to, and what they can and cannot do. Where is the default configuration namespace, right? Or where should they push that in the configuration and so on. And that's it. I mean, basically, now what it means is that as an admin, I can see everything, right? Including a beautiful graph and everything that you can see. And you need all the policy, all the stuff that attached to it. We have, for instance, GraphQL into the mesh. We build it into Istio, or Envoy. So basically, you can see, the policies, the schema, whatever. It's all the big management that you need. But as a workspace admin or workspace user, when you log in, you're only going to see your workspace. You can even pluggable to make a decision if you even want to show them that there is a cluster or service mesh. Potentially, they shouldn't even know about that, right? And then the other thing is the idea of catalog. So, right now, maybe I trust my team. So I will tell them, hey, yeah, you're responsible for everything. Well, I can say you're responsible only for retry and timeout, but I can even do it more. I can basically say, I don't trust you at all. You guys crazy. All I wanted you to do is basically, I will give you basically a 3 option. You can do timeout 5, timeout 10, and timeout 15. That's all I trust you to do. And then as a user, it's basically a catalog. Like seriously, they can come and choose that policy. So that's number one. The biggest one, which I think is very interesting, is the feature of import and export. So let me give you an example. We have a big, huge customer, huge customer, right? 60 data center, the biggest distro of Istio running in the world today, right? Thousands of instances of Istio. And on that organization, it's built from a lot of teams, a lot of groups. And huge organization that they bought, right? So it's like, imagine like the biggest organization that you are, you probably can guess it. But anyway, they have one billing system. That's what they have. So like in all that organization, they have one billing system. So that's one workspace, but they want the other team to actually consume it. So basically, we have the concept of import and export. So you can take a workspace and basically export a service, which is the billing service. And that's where we embedded developer portal. So basically, when you actually exported it, the other team can see it. They can click at the tile. They can see the doc. They can ask an API key or whatever else they're using. And basically onboard it themselves inside the organization, right? And basically leverage that. So it's really, really, honestly, really, really make the experience really, really easy. And again, we just thought about, for instance, what developer portal mean in that concept, for instance, right? That's what it means, right? I mean, somehow you want to consume all those great services. So again, we did a lot of that kind of work, and I think that it's really, really make it, exciting for people. And you mentioned developer, which is very important. What is the user developer? But honestly, we are not selling to the developer, right? We are selling to the SRE or the IT or the platform owner or the Openshift owner, right? So when we are selling it to them, honestly, also their user experience needs to be better, because honestly, it's hard to manage. It's not an easy thing to do, right? For instance, today, if you wanted to consume it, Istio, you need to do N-1, which is basically mean that you need to upgrade your system every 6 months, let's say. Honestly, this is not the way. I don't see our user doing it. I mean, right? We have a lot of OpenShift user, and I can tell you they're not upgrading every 6 months. So now the question is how we can help them. And for instance, for our product, it's N-4, plus we're bringing all the patches and CVEs all the way, basically, to N-4. So even that little thing, right, which is minor, or, maybe they want FIPS compliance, maybe they want ARMS because they want to save money. Only that by itself, the life cycle of Istio, install, upgrade, only that by itself, I think it's extremely powerful. And as I said, we're doing exactly the same thing right now with Cilium, because in the nutshell, we're in application networking, right? I mean, this is also something that we care about. And we can do some interesting defense in depth, because we basically own the layer 4 and the layer 7.
Yeah, we should talk about RHEL adoption at some point. That can be a slow activity. So I know you wanted to talk a little bit about what's going on with Envoy and what Solo's been doing with Envoy. And I was kind of thinking here we'd talk a little bit more about kind of forward-looking stuff. So if you could tell us a little bit about what you've been doing with the Envoy proxy, that would be cool.
Yeah, so I mean, we're working on Envoy for, I don't know what, 5 years since the company started, honestly. That was our main focus. Because as I said, when I looked at the market back then, I saw a service mesh, but Istio wasn't ready. It was clear to me that it would take a long, long time until they will get it right. So for the meantime, I said, okay, obviously, I do believe that these things is going to be everywhere one day. So what can I do for the and I'm a startup, right? I mean, I need to figure out how eventually to create a product. I can't just sit down and said, sure, 5 years and do away. So what I try to figure out is that what I can build that I can sell today, and today is 5 years ago, but will make us very attractive, and service mesh is going to be everywhere. And I bet on the proxy. Proxy was, Matt got it right from the first go. It's not surprisingly because he was building it a few times before that. So when I saw that, I said, okay, that's really, really powerful. This is the thing that honestly mature. It was running in Lyft already, right, in production for a few years before. So I said, and I really like the fact that it was different than anything else. Like, for instance, comparing to Nginx or HR proxy, it was an API driven, and you will be able to customize it because there is what's called the filter chain. So you can put your own logic and so on. So that was honestly really, really important to us. So we took the proxy and we basically started to look of what we can do with it, right? And honestly, to me, I'm a big believer. Someone asked me one time, what is the best product or what is the best technology? To me, it's the product that people are using. So to me, what was important is that, it will take time for this thing to come to place. But if I will be able to run Envoy in production and get familiar with this, get it better, make sure that it's working, scale it, that will give me a huge benefit. So what I did is I started with the API gateway market. I basically targeted the API gateway market and said, okay, that's a market that honestly nothing changed to date, I will say honestly. The only thing that changed there is basically the messaging on the marketing. Like, it's basically become between, instead of API gateway to API gateway for microservices. But that was the only change, honestly. So we basically build the best API gateway, or the API gateway that I will want to run in production is CRD based. Think about it, right? We were changing the world with DevOps. We were doing container and Kubernetes and all these exciting things. And then, what I want to run is this huge monolithic active Cassandra cluster. Just did not feel right to me. So we built Glue, right? And by the way, when you describe it, you mentioned that what we need to do is to glue again the application. That's exactly why we call it Glue. Because my English is not great. So every time that I try to describe what we're going to do, I said, we're gluing. So it was the best word I found. And therefore, we changed it to OO, but that's the reason we call it the way we call it. So we started with this, which was really good. The advantage that it gave us is two. Number one, we're running Envoy for production probably better, longer than anybody. I mean, not Lyft and guys, but you know what I mean. Like, we know Envoy, we saw it in stress, we saw it in huge stress, most likely using our product everywhere right now on the gateway even, forget about the mesh. So I felt that gave us a lot of tooling to see what can be wrong, how do you upgrade it, how do you manage that with, honestly, it's the best experience. And the second thing that I think it was really, really good for us is that we worked with a lot of the customers. And Solo has a lot of customers. We actually, we're $1 billion company right now, mainly because we have a lot of customers. So we learned from them a lot about what are they looking for? Like, why should they move to something like Envoy? What is the feature that they are missing versus Nginx or any other? And while we're basically all this time for the last 5 years, we're basically enhancing or extending Envoy. So it started with simple stuff like transformation filter was very popular for us, or gRPC, or, simple stuff like this, rate limiting, external auth. But I think that, for instance, because we became so familiar, a lot of the stuff that we're doing recently is enhancement that is honestly a little bit crazy. Like, for instance, we built GraphQL into Envoy. So Envoy has the ability to have the filter, as I said, and each filter is basically a C++ async code, which means that you can leverage a lot of those libraries. So GraphQL by itself is very complex. C++ async is really, really complex. Now, merge them together and make sure that it will scale. It's honestly a nightmare. But we have an amazing team. So we actually worked on it for over a year and we made it done. And that's huge because, you think about what our customer are telling us, but they're telling us that, a lot of their application team basically trying to reinvent the API gateway right now by basically putting this like maybe Apollo server or writing their own server for GraphQL. And now you have basically two hop every time because it should go from the proxy and then it's going to these things that they build in Node.js usually. Honestly, not the greatest thing that I will want to see in my infrastructure. So we basically kind of like united it together and teach Envoy how to speak GraphQL. So when the request of GraphQL will come to Envoy, you will know how to do the round trip and everything in it, including the fact that we can actually take a lot of advantage for what Envoy giving us out of the box, like security and observability, and
Right.
So it's really, really powerful.
Actually,
yeah.
You kind of touched on it a little bit, but like, and I noticed, Solo is kind of investing in GraphQL. Like, why should I care about GraphQL? Like, what's interesting about it? It feels a little to me like writing SQL in JavaScript. What's it for, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I think that the most advantage that there is in GraphQL is the velocity that you can get from your team using GraphQL. I mean, I'll give you a simple example, right? We needed to do a SOC 2 compliance, right? And we needed to get some data for our auditor. So, we went to GitLab, right? To GitHub and basically tried to collect all this data. If we couldn't use GraphQL, we seriously needed to do a bunch of REST kind of like query to everywhere. And that would be really, really hard because you need to merge and then you write a lot of logic and so on. Instead of it, we just ask one question, right? In GraphQL, boom, we got all the data. It saved us a lot of time. So that's us, right? We are not, that's not, that's just an example of use case. But think about people that all what they're doing is basically writing a UI application or basically. So if you think about it, the amount of the work that they're doing by merging data, by collecting it, and the performance of getting all this data and then merge it on the server. So honestly, it's really, really hard. Or worse, they either can do it on the client side or they need to go to the server people and say, hey, can you add these things? Again, which is more complexity, and now go figure out maybe the backend engineer is busy and you cannot do that. So all this process, honestly, it's very, very annoying and just slowing down your team. So I think that the advantage of GraphQL is honestly, and the tooling that the community is built around it, is that it's damn simple. Like everybody can do it. They can do it really quick. They can write an application in no time versus if you're doing REST, it's a little bit more complex and taking more time. So yeah, no, I'm a big fan, but honestly, it's not only me. Honestly, the reason we did it is because we heard it from the customers. And if you look, I don't know, just for instance, of the trending of Google, go Google and check how many people looking for REST versus GraphQL access. You will see it's like, right? People very, very interesting in GraphQL. It's really big for the front-end engineer. That's like the biggest cool thing that's happening there.
Yeah, like with many things, it's funny because as I recall, right, GraphQL has actually been around for quite a long time.
Yes.
And I used to use it with graphing databases. So it's kind of like sometimes when something starts being used kind of slightly differently, I have to kind of like rewrap my brain around it, right? Because I used to use it this way, and now people are doing something different with it. So so I've been playing around with it a little bit. I definitely the ability to kind of connect information together that doesn't normally go together in your data mart or whatever is a huge advantage. And the fact that so many tools like Solos, right, that are kind of like almost like natively processing it, that makes another huge advantage to it. I think all the databases starting to be all the things, so like a database these days is not just relational or just document store or just, name value. They're often just doing them all. And kind of based on the query that you're asking are starting to translate into the best method to get to it. So I think it's
not only the database.
Cool.
It's not only the database, right? It's all your services. Think about it. We created all those little microservices everywhere, right? And now think about the UI person who needs right now to go and connect to 10 microservices in order to get a very simple UI. That's a lot of work, If we can actually in one query enable him to do all of this, that's really, really big. In performance way, also make sure that it doesn't need to worry about, about the security. And that's where Solo basically is done, right?
I was gonna kind of say like the security and the performance and all this stuff, which, if you have kind of that, front end UI developer now doesn't have to go and figure out how to securely access each of those or rate limit, because some of them are more expensive than others, et cetera, right?
No, and a lot of the stuff, honestly, they're either trying to rebuild it themselves, right? Which is ridiculous because you have the proxy next to it, already know how to do it very well. And the second thing, they basically saying to you, look, don't worry, the security should be owned by the application. It shouldn't, right? I mean, all the point of service mesh is trying to make sure that the people will not need to, trust the engineer to, I don't know, add those libraries, something like that, right?
Right.
So to me, this is like really big. The fact that we can actually do right now, even on the level of the resolver, kind of like do whatever, OPA or anything that you want, basically, or OICD, or I think it's a big one.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really kind of opens up your ability to kind of hire as well, right? Because as soon as you don't have to have every junior engineer worrying about security, right, or that kind of thing.
Yes.
It's risky to have junior engineers worrying about security. That's where you get better at it with experience, right? So if you can have kind of the senior engineers taking a look at the overarching thing, right, and then letting the junior engineers collect the pieces together, I think that's a much more scalable for your organization as well as your software. Which is huge.
No, but also
the other
think,
one,
honestly, one thing that I'm just going to add it, as you said, even if he's a senior, people making mistakes, people forget.
Oh yeah, right.
So I mean, basically, it's the difference of, are we trusting people to remember to do this, or are we just going to make sure that it will be forced by the mesh? And I think that it's better to make sure that the people who know what it is will take responsibility for that.
It was fun. Idit and I had the same thought when you said senior people get better at this. I was like, do we?
Well, I guess I mean, truly at the end of the day, right, what we want to do is feed into the programmer's default, which is lazy. It's like, as long as we can solve the problem once and then, and solve it correctly the first time and then never touch it again, we will generally be a much happier set of campers, right? So the other one that I wanted to ask you about is just because I also see it very much on the horizon and not a lot of play is WebAssembly. I was talking to a friend of mine about it the other day, and he's like, "Oh yeah, it's going to take over the entire Earth. It will be the hottest thing since sliced bread if it's not already." What are your thoughts on WebAssembly? Is that something that the audience of kind of Kubernetes deployers and operators should be thinking about? Is that is it important and on the horizon?
So it's a great question. I mean, when you're thinking about WebAssembly as a technology, and it's leveraged in a lot of layers, right? One of the layers where it started is basically the browser, and it's making a lot of sense, right? I mean, the reason they started it is because I think it's the Mozilla team, and the reason is they wanted to allow people to create something that is extremely, extremely fast, right? So you don't have to write only JavaScript. Maybe you want to write C++ or anything else, and basically enable you to extend basically your application or your browser. But we need to make sure that you cannot crash the browser, right? Because that's too important. So that's where WebAssembly is basically started. This is great technology because the way they build it, because of that functionality, there is a lot of advantage here. First of all, you can write it in a lot of language and it's translating to a low-level code. Second of all, it's dynamically loaded to the browser, which means that you can dynamically load it to somewhere else. And the last one is basically the fact that it's sandbox. It's basically contained. So all of this was very great. And for instance, when we were looking about it with Google, a lot of the stuff, it's not a big problem, but to us anyway, but a lot of the stuff that we built in Envoy was basically, we extended Envoy with this filter chain ability, which means that you need to write a C++ async, and then you need to recompile Envoy. And honestly, that's not the funnest things to do. So, basically, the question was, and this is why Istio did this like round trip on the beginning with Mixer, is how can we make people that are not solo engineers basically to extend their, the Envoy, right? And add logic. And I think that WebAssembly was really nice because basically what they were thinking is that there's a similar functionality. You need to make sure that it's not going to take down the Envoy. You need to make sure, so it have to be contained. It needs to dynamically be load to Envoy because you don't want people to recompile Envoy. And ideally, we would want them to do it in any language they want, but the performance should be close to native. So that's exactly kind of like WebAssembly could be these things that extending Envoy, and that's what we built together with Google to basically enhance that. So we did this and so worked a lot on the user experience and how to make it simple to consume. But a few things happen in the market, and this is very, very interesting in my opinion. So this is, I'm just going to kind of like come again. It started in the browser. We brought it to Envoy, but there is a lot of other people that are trying to replace Docker or containerd with this. So I think, again, 3 different reasons, right? I mean, in the browser, it makes a lot of sense, and it's fantastic. In Envoy, well, we'll talk about it in a second because there is some issues. As a containers, honestly, I don't think that the benefit will be too big. Like think about why Docker did catch versus, I don't know, other technology or like Unikernel that we tried to do before. The reason is because people will change all the market only if the benefit is huge. So like you're saying, well, I will need to pay a price, for instance, create a tooling for debugging or something like that. But I know that when I will do that, I mean, I will get to the best experience ever and it will be fantastic. That's why Docker catch, right? It was 10 times better than VM. When we came, for instance, with Unikern, people said, well, we already have Docker. Yeah, it's a little bit faster. Yeah, it's a little, but who cares? Should I right now reinvent everything because of it? It doesn't make any sense.
But so even over LXC, right? I mean, like, it was like, it's not even just performance. It was just ease of use. It was like everything. Like Docker was just like perfect storm, right?
Exactly. So to me, it's exactly the same idea with Wasm. Is that makes sense to make Wasm run instead of container? Yeah, maybe. Sometimes there is, but honestly, it's not that. You know what I mean? It's like you're not getting dramatically better performance. You're not getting. Why? That's the question that I will ask myself. So I don't think, honestly, personally, I believe this is not something that I know people working on this and excited about it. I just don't think that the benefit is that big that all the community right now will change and run Wasm instead of Docker.
But then you could write your container runtime in like Haskell or something. So, maybe. That was a joke.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's still to me like not that exciting. So now in Envoy, I will say that here's the problem. So I think that every time we are big into, I'm big on technology. That's what I care. But honestly, I should recognize what's going on in the market. As I said, Wasm got a lot of excitement specifically for stuff like the web browser as well as Envoy. But in order that to be very good in Envoy, we need tooling. And unfortunately, there were some changes that happened, right? So for instance, Mozilla team, I think, was laid off and a lot of them went to another places. So a lot of the contributors suddenly, less focused on this. There was a lot of politics involved and so on. When these things happen, honestly, it's slowing down the community and and the technology itself. When the technology is slowing down, honestly, it's hard to adopt. So is that going to be the next thing that's happening? I mean, it's a good technology. It depends if the community will kind of together and put their faith. But right now, I don't see a lot of work done there, like specifically on Envoy part. And that's worrying me because it feels to me that even though that's a nice idea, and you just don't know that a lot of people using it, which is a problem. If you're not using it, you don't know where it's the problem. So to me, this is honestly.
I was just going to say, so is this, if we do have, developers in the audience, right, who want to contribute to open source, would this be an interesting place to do so? Is this a place that you could kind of make a career out of, would be kind of like building out how WebAssembly works?
So yeah, but again, if you want, but probably it's not going to be enough. We need as a community to go and decide that we're making it successful. Again, as I said, like I don't know if you remember, but when we announced WebAssembly support for Envoy, we were the user experience. We created a Docker-like toolings and so on. The thing, as I said, is that there was a lot of promising but less implementation. So it's getting better, but honestly, just too slow. That's the problem that I have. Like we talked about the ability to write in every code, but honestly, and there's not a lot of people working on this. So to me, that's my worriness as someone who's looking at this. I say, well, I don't know that it's going as fast as I hope it to go. And eventually, if it's not, it's just going to be, no one will use it. That's what will happen. In Envoy specifically, I think that in the browser is there to stay, just different use cases. So that's my opinion. a personal opinion. I think in general, what people trying to build in every organization is basically plugins. So I think that the thing that is more sexy right now is eBPF. It's not that different. It's basically plug into the operating system. But it's good because if you think about it, a lot of the stuff that we're building always start at eye level because it's easier to implement, and then we optimize it as low in the stack as we can. So I think that will create a lot of optimization for service meshes and other observability tooling and so on in the kernel. So I'm actually pretty excited about that. And we are very actively working on this.
A little kind of sidebar. We actually talked to Liz Rice about eBPF in episode 7, if you want to go back and watch it, for anybody who's wants to hear more about that. I think WebAssembly is also super interesting, like on the kind of Envoy level, because I mean, who doesn't want dynamically loading libraries that are replaceable on the fly? That seems like a very strong feature. So I really like them in Envoy. I think they're really interesting. But I hear you. The community has to kind of be there for it, right? And it needs to be the uses of it need to be more somebody's most important components. We need a bunch of people who are kind of mainlining that tool chain as part of their deployment. Otherwise, there's not enough focus on it.
Exactly.
So but like I said, I think it's a very cool
I hear you. I was very excited about that. Yeah.
All right. So let's see. Moving to, I don't know, did you have more questions about that, Josh, or do you want to move on to something else? Okay, cool. All right. So we do, I think we should ask, right, is like, so how has your experience been as a kind of a community member and as, kind of trying to run this startup and launching it off the ground and, and it sounds like quite successfully, and doing that in Kubernetes community is it embracing, like, is the community embracing concepts like people doing startups, or is there a certain amount of fear of capitalism, or have you found a nice happy medium there? How's that experience been as being a community member and also trying to run this successful startup?
Yeah, I think that the community itself is awesome in Kubernetes, and I think that's what makes it so successful. I think that, as always, there's the people as community members are having a blast and doing great and very accepting and doing awesome. And there's the corporation that they can be less nice. But I think this is fine. I mean, in the nutshell, I think that the Kubernetes ecosystem is great. I mean, as I said to you, they are so welcoming and so including and everything that we can do. So, I mean, to me, personally, and it's not only, I mean, Kubernetes is one in the environment. I mean, the other one is Istio, right? I mean, the community there is insanely good and awesome. Envoy community, right? We are a big part of this. And Cilium, right? I mean, Cilium right now is becoming a CNCF product. Like every good, project that being successful, you need to have more than one provider selling it. Otherwise, it's basically their product. It's not the community. So I think you guys know that, but Solo is selling Cilium, and we enhancing it quite a lot and excited about that a lot, because I think it's going to give us another layer that we can, optimize the mesh and optimize the application networking and so on. So to me, the communities are great. I mean, as I said to you, I mean, it's interesting because each of them is different, right? I mean, Istio from the beginning was very, inclusive, like very interesting in getting new people and just help and be together. I think Envoy the same thing. I think that Kubernetes, that's what I saw as well. I think that, Cilium is a new community, so this will be interesting because mainly right now it's like 11 people. So hopefully they will know how to separate between I'm the sovereign and I need to make money to, I'm a open source CNCF project, which means that I want people to come and help me to make that better. And I think that will be interesting to check if which direction it's going.
Interesting.
Time will say, yeah.
Well, I think we should probably wrap it up there. But thanks so much for, sharing your thoughts with us. I really appreciate, like I said, the whole point of the show, right, is to get some insight from people who are kind of in the trenches and working on this stuff about what you think is going to happen next. And I really do think you've been able to share that with us. So I really appreciate it. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was a blast.
Indeed. I want to extend my thanks to you for joining us as well. I really enjoyed some of the kind of breakdown of how you thought about your forward analysis of the space that you ended up building a company in. I thought that was actually quite revelatory, really interesting. So thank you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks. All right, so we wanted to invite Tam, who is our community manager for Kubernetes by example, and we went back and forth on pronouncing her last name, and I'll say Nguyen, if I recall correctly. And so we just wanted to show off kind of one of the learning paths that's on Kubernetes by example that is coming out. Is it out, or is it or should be out by now?
It's already out.
Okay,
so we
that's what I thought.
5 new tracks at KubeCon EU a couple weeks ago. So hi everyone, thanks for having me, Langdon and Josh. Good to see you.
As we used to say on Openshift TV on all our different shows, on the show we kind of live in the future, and so we're never quite sure where the real world, if it's caught up or not yet. So so I have clicked the share button, but I'm not sure if it is sharing to the actual stream.
I don't see you sharing right now.
I don't either, which is making me concerned.
Okay. Well, you troubleshoot.
Well, I mean, as far as I can tell, it is sharing. I don't know why it's not. Yeah.
I don't see it on my side. Josh, do you see it at all?
I don't see it on Twitch.
Yeah, I do not see it on my side. Is it?
See if there's any.
It's not showing up on YouTube either. Okay.
This is why we don't normally share the screen, because we don't know how. Yeah, it totally seems to indicate that I'm sharing. I wonder if in the back end, does somebody need to turn on the other person, like a fourth person that is the screen sharing? Maybe that's the challenge. Oh, look at that. Magic.
Ta-da!
Either somebody did something or my double clicking worked. All right, so you were gonna show us where it was, right? So I went to DuckDuckGo because it's cool.
So for some of the audience members that may not know, Cube by Example is a free learning community site. So it's designed so that you can learn by example. So if you go to cubebyexample.com, Langdon, and then I can walk you through some of our new stuff. So right now we have 15 learning paths, and we introduced 5 at KubeCon a couple weeks ago. So that's all of our stuff right now, which is pretty extensive. And then if all of our learning paths are developed by contributors, and there's a mix of content. So there's hands-on guided exercises so that you can learn by doing. And then there are video tutorials that you can learn by watching. So right now, since this show was on Service Mesh, let's click on the Istio fundamentals track. So that's a new track that we announced a couple weeks ago. Shout out to Andres Hernandez Bermudez from Mexico City for creating this new content for us. But there's a couple guided exercises and a couple lectures that you can go in and learn everything you want to learn about Istio. And it's some really
This is the written part. Where's you said there's videos too?
This one doesn't have video tracks yet.
Oh, okay.
It depends on the contributors. Like for instance, our Rook content right now is all videos. So it just varies between different learning paths.
I gotcha.
But, yeah, the Istio one has guided exercises that are pretty
right. I think at least for me, that's my preference anyway. Like, it's funny. I do a lot of video, but I actually like to read stuff. So, although ASCII Cinema is very, very cool if you haven't checked that out, which lets you actually cut and paste from the videos, which makes things handy.
Oh, nice. We'll have to check that out because that's one of the things we definitely want to do with our videos is transcribe it, because that's the feedback that we got from some people is I just want to copy and paste some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Which,
I wrote a horrible hacky version of it in Python many years ago because it drove me nuts that the videos were never like, you couldn't select anything out of them, right? And then ASCII Cinema came along and did it properly.
Nice.
But yeah, so here's Istio.
Where is the best place for folks to go to perform these exercises? So, like I've got a step-by-step guide in front of me. Like, what are the resources you'd point people to for where I would get a cluster to run these things?
Yeah. So, Langdon, if you want to go back up to the nav, if you go under resources, there is a get started try Kubernetes landing page that we have. And you can build and deploy in a real environment. So you get to choose either you can learn with Minikube or you can check out our Red Hat developer sandbox.
Right on.
Yeah. So and all the lessons are, yep, there it is right there, the sandbox. So you can just sign up for that and then start building.
You can also do the local version sandbox too, right? But I think change names. But yeah, you can also download that. But Minikube is really quite nice and quite easy and pretty easy to plug into. I was just experimenting with it over the weekend because I haven't used it in a while. Yeah, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's more resources too. So like under
I was looking through like kind of intro to Kubernetes, right? And like there's a lot of videos here too, which is good for like when you're trying to explain what something is, rather than like trying to kind of walk you through how to do something.
Right.
But I really liked that it had like kind of every single little piece, right? So you can kind of go and be like, okay, hey, I saw a stateful set somewhere, right? Like, let me go find out what that is.
Yeah, absolutely. And then a new feature that we launched. So definitely after each learning path is a beyond KBE section where you can find links to like repos and prerequisites. But something that we recently launched, and you were just on it, is our KBE community forum. It's beta right now, but yeah, if you click into it, it's a live forum. You could start a discussion. You can talk to our contributors. You can let us know what content you want to see or whatnot. Or even if you have suggestions on future KBE Insider guests. So yeah, check out our forum. It's something that we just launched. And I think it'll be a good feature for the community to ask real questions live.
Yeah, definitely. The more feedback we can get on topics people want to hear about or on people they want us to try to interview, the easier it is for us to know what direction you'd like to go.
Cool. And then we're also running a contest right now. So the first 3 folks that start a discussion on our new KBE community forum, you'll get an awesome KBE swag bundle, which includes a really soft hoodie that I'm wearing right now. So yeah, first 3 people. So I'll look out for that. Yeah, so that's all the new stuff. We're always looking for feedback. We release at every KubeCon. So KubeCon EU was our last release, and then our next release will be at KubeCon North America in October. So we're planning for new content and new features for the site, but we'd love to hear what the community would like to see.
Yeah, and basically there's a key to watching live, right? Is that now you have a chance of entering the contest and being first, and getting swag is always the most important. Cool. So should we wrap up the show there and call that an episode?
Absolutely.
All right. Do we know who's on next time?